Hello! This 2022 Denver Energy Code training was developed in conjunction with Community Planning and Development and the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. This training is provided as a high-level overview for everything that is new with the Denver Energy Code and will help direct you to the right resources to learn more. It is designed to be viewed in about 20 minutes. If you download the PDF version of this training, you can access the links to many other resources and training opportunities on each slide. Why are we focused on climate action? Denver's goal is to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2040, and buildings and homes are responsible for 64% of our emissions. As a part of this, Denver also has a goal of having all new buildings and homes to be net zero energy by the year 2030, and getting all existing buildings and homes to be net zero energy by the year 2040. Space and water heating account for 97% of the greenhouse gas emissions in Denver's buildings and homes. So addressing the greenhouse gas reduction potential in space and water heating energy use is key in helping Denver reach its goals. Luckily, our electric grid is also getting cleaner, so we have an excellent opportunity to electrify our space and water heating to help us reduce these greenhouse gas emissions. Xcel Energy provides all of the electricity that Denver purchases, and they are required by state legislature to decarbonize the electric grid by 80% by the year 2030. Xcel Energy has voluntarily exceeded that target, and they are on track to achieve at least 85% emission reduction by 2030. So when Denver buildings use electricity to heat, cool, and operate, rather than using fossil fuels, these all-electric buildings can take advantage of the work Xcel is doing to create a cleaner, renewable grid. This gets even better when the buildings use high-efficiency electric systems like heat pumps. The technology exists to transition our buildings and homes to highly efficient all-electric heat, powered by renewable electricity through the use of heat pumps. So if natural gas is 80% efficient and electric resistance heating is 100% efficient, heat pumps are 200 to 400% efficient. Instead of creating heat, they pull it from the outside air, just like air conditioners do, except working in reverse. While not a new technology, there has been significant progress in heat pump technology, with many heat pump HVAC systems having capacity to pull heat from the outside air, even at extremely low outside air temperatures. That means that not all heat pumps are created equal, of course. Cold climate performance is key, and cold climate heat pumps can maintain a higher efficiency and capacity at lower temperatures and can work beautifully in Colorado's climate. Electric resistance backup can also be provided to bridge the gap. Thus, building electrification is a prevailing theme for Denver's new energy code. In addition to the greenhouse gas reduction potential, there are excellent incentives and tax credits for heat pumps, and there is some efficiency in design in having heating and cooling in one system. Removing natural gas and combustion from buildings reduces the danger from carbon monoxide, which is a great concern when it comes to equity in building design. For a new construction project, design teams will find that going all-electric makes for a much easier compliance path under both the prescriptive and performance pathways, and that all-electric projects have opportunity to comply with the Denver Green Buildings Ordinance when using the energy conservation path. For existing buildings, there are additional advantages in going to an all-electric or even mostly electric project, such as a reduced target for the Energize Denver Ordinance's 2030 performance target for buildings that have 80% electric site energy. This slide shows a high-level overview of the work and the climate action goals we have in our buildings and homes work in Denver. Starting from the bottom 4 blue rows are oriented around Energize Denver, which is an ordinance that impacts existing buildings for electrification and building performance standards. The 2 middle red rows are centered around our work in new buildings and homes. This starts with a new energy code that went into effect in May 2023 and highlights the goal that new buildings and homes perform as net zero energy buildings in 2030. The top row shows the work Xcel Energy is doing to clean the electric grid. They've committed to that goal to have an 80% renewable grid by 2030, which, as mentioned on a previous slide, is a bit ahead of schedule, and 100% renewable by the year 2050. So with that background in mind, let's move into a high-level summary of the 2022 Denver Energy Code. This presentation is intended to give you a broad overview. You can find the full 2022 Denver Energy Code at denvergov.org/building code. When talking about codes, a bit of naming conventions can be helpful. In all of the references on Denver's website, you'll hear us use a single reference to a code section in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. This is because the 2022 Denver Building and Fire Code adopts the base codes as reference. So it's good practice to check Denver's code first to see if there are deletions or modifications to a section, and then reference the base code. You will also find a handful of other things in the Denver Building Code that are new, such as Chapter 11 in the Denver Residential Code, which has been replaced by the residential provisions of the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Let's look at how Denver Energy Codes are helping Denver reach its goals. These charts show the progress from the 2022 Denver Energy Code overlaid with the progress needed to meet the city's Net Zero Energy 2030 goals. It is based on carbon intensity. Commercial is on the left and residential is on the right. The Net Zero Energy trajectory path is represented by the blue dashed line, with the goal that buildings are designed as net zero energy by the year 2027 and are performing as net zero energy by 2030. The blue dot labeled 2019 represents the 2019 Denver Energy Code, and the blue dot clouded in green represents what is in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. For both commercial and residential buildings, we are very near the trajectory line to stay on the path towards net zero energy in 2030. We made great progress for this code cycle. Let's take a moment to review how Denver defines commercial and residential buildings under the Denver Energy Code. The residential provisions of the 2022 Denver Energy Code apply to residential buildings that meet the definition from the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Residential buildings are detached 1- and 2-family dwellings and multiple single-family dwellings, townhouses, and group R3 and R4 buildings that are 3 stories or less in height above grade plane. The commercial provisions of the 2022 Denver Energy Code apply to everything else. New buildings with conditioned space that are not defined as residential buildings, and any such building undergoing an addition, remodel, alteration, repair, change of occupancy that would result in an increase of demand for either fossil fuel or electrical energy, or change of use. New in the 2022 Denver Energy Code is the definition of an all-electric property. This is used in several places to facilitate easier compliance for all-electric properties. An all-electric property is a property that contains no permanently installed equipment or appliances that utilize combustion, plumbing for fuel gas or fuel oil, or fuel gas utility connection installed within the buildings or site, except for emergency power systems and standby power systems. Emergency power systems and standby power systems are defined in the code, and service loads where interruption of the primary power could result in loss of human life, serious injuries, or could create hazards or hamper rescue or firefighting operations. So, as an example, would a project that includes a hard-piped outdoor gas fireplace meet the definition of an all-electric property? No, if the gas fireplace is permanently installed, it does not meet the definition. Let's look at residential amendments next. These are the residential high-impact climate provisions that are either new or updated in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. You'll find many more specifics and additional training resources in the residential section of Denver's Net Zero Energy Hub website, which is linked here. Both the performance and prescriptive path are designed to incentivize electrification, making compliance easier and simpler for all electric properties. There's an amendment that requires on-site renewable energy to be installed, but is also written with many exceptions for additional efficiency points and all-electric homes. Water heaters have demand load management requirements to provide grid flexibility as we electrify our homes. We also have requirements for future-proofing the installation of electric vehicles, electric appliances, and solar panels. The Denver Energy Code allows for a variety of prescriptive and performance-based compliance options to demonstrate that your residential project complies with the Denver Energy Code. Design teams should become familiar with all of the compliance options so that you can choose which one is best for your specific project. The performance-based pathways, which include total building performance and energy rating index, offer the most flexibility, while the prescriptive path offers simplicity. Next, let's review the commercial amendments. This list gives a high-level summary of the top impact commercial amendments for the 2022 Denver Energy Code, and you'll find many more specifics and additional training resources in the commercial section of Denver's Net Zero Energy Hub website, which is linked here. The first two here are for partial electrification of space and water heating. Effective January 1st, 2024, fossil fuel warm air furnaces and electric resistant space heating equipment are not allowed for space heating. Also, fossil fuel and electric resistance, instantaneous and storage water heaters are not permitted to provide potable hot water. There are some exceptions and allowances to both of those though, so it's important for design teams to get familiar with these provisions. Numbers 3 through 6 are the new compliance paths, both prescriptive and performance. The prescriptive path requires mixed fuel buildings to achieve more points in the credit chart than all electric buildings. And the performance paths all incentivize electrification and also set up new buildings for success with the Energize Denver existing building requirements. There are updates to the electric vehicle requirements. Water heaters also have demand load management requirements to provide that grid flexibility as we electrify our homes, since grid flexibility is a key component of being a net zero energy building. We have many more Denver-specific provisions that align with our net zero energy building goals for both commercial and residential buildings. Next, let's review the various compliance pathways for commercial projects. Much like residential projects, commercial projects have the option for either prescriptive or performance compliance, giving teams flexibility in finding the best compliance path for their project. Each compliance path is set up to incentivize building electrification. Prescriptive compliance is more straightforward in determining the requirements of a compliant building. Performance compliance requires energy modeling, but allows for more flexibility. The performance path also has 3 different options for compliance. Compliance by energy cost savings under Section C407, by site energy savings under Appendix SE, or by designing to a fixed energy performance target under Appendix PT. The link here will take you to Denver's webpage dedicated to design phase resources, on which you will find many more resources and training opportunities for the various pathways. Let's review the process that is required for any commercial project. All projects will first need to choose a compliance pathway and then comply with the mandatory requirements. Many of the mandatory requirements are the same between the two pathways. Teams will need to review the requirements of the Denver Green Buildings Ordinance, the Denver Green Code, commissioning, and envelope and air leakage testing. All projects will also need to use the IECC checklist to document the mandatory requirements of their selected pathway, which will vary. The checklist is also where teams will report their 2030 EUI target for the Energize Denver Ordinance. Lastly, projects pursuing the performance path will also need to submit the Energy Model Report and documentation. Let's talk about the Denver Green Code, commonly referred to by the acronym DGC, addresses both climate change and biodiversity loss through mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. It was first adopted in 2019 as a purely voluntary code, and now under the 2022 code has some limited mandatory use. The Denver Green Code provides guidance for greener buildings through provisions targeting energy efficiency, resource conservation, sustainable materials, indoor environmental quality, water safety, ecologically beneficial site development and land use, and improved building and landscape performance. All new commercial construction projects and major renovations will have limited mandatory use of the Denver Green Code. Note that this does not apply to residential projects as defined by Denver's code. The definition for major renovations is an alteration that is a Level 3 alteration per the Denver existing building code, and additions that are either 100,000 square feet or greater than 50% of the existing project's gross floor area. Projects will choose a certain number of credits from each category as shown in this table. This is designed such that teams can choose options that are cost-effective and fit well with their project's other goals. The link here will take you to a web page where you can learn more about the Green Code and its provisions. The Denver Green Code is separate from, but complementary to, Denver's Green Buildings Ordinance, commonly referred to as the GBO. Established in 2018, the GBO accelerates more sustainable development through a menu of strategies. The GBO applies to new buildings, existing buildings submitted for roof permits, and building additions, where each of those is 25,000 square feet or larger. It is designed to layer over mandatory codes and regulations, including the Denver Green Code, and covered projects must meet the requirements of both as applicable. Projects selected to meet Denver Green Code limited mandatory use requirements cannot be used to satisfy requirements of the GBO. No double dipping. Note that enrollment in the Denver Green Code's Enhanced Use Program satisfies all Green Buildings Ordinance requirements. Let's also touch on the Energize Denver Ordinance, which applies to existing commercial and multifamily buildings. As noted on an earlier slide, the goal of the ordinance is to reduce emissions by 80% by the year 2040. There are three components to it: electrification, benchmarking, and performance. For electrification, this requires buildings to electrify their space and water heating equipment upon system replacement when cost-effective. For benchmarking, this requires commercial buildings above 25,000 square feet to report their energy usage. And the building performance requirements have energy requirement targets based on their building type, just for larger buildings. For smaller buildings, there are LED or renewable energy requirements. Note that while this ordinance does not apply directly to new construction projects, it should absolutely be considered during the design process. So let's look at the Energize Denver electrification requirements a little more closely. This chart shows phasing for the Energize Denver requirements for the partial electrification of space and water heating and cooling equipment upon system replacement in existing commercial and multifamily buildings, and then how this is integrated in the Denver Energy Code. Note that this does not apply to residential buildings, as defined by the Denver Energy Code. In 2023, the permit process changed to achieve near parity between permitting between gas systems and heat pump systems. In 2025, heat pumps will be required upon replacement of listed equipment systems when cost effective. And in 2027, the code will be updated to require heat pumps for even more systems upon replacement when cost effective. There are exceptions for emergency equipment replacement. Denver wants to support existing buildings in this process and has an electrification program for existing buildings. For additional resources on Denver's electrification programs, please check out our website at denvergov.org/building electrification, where you will find information on code changes, electrification feasibility reports, equipment rebates, and more. If you don't find what you're looking for there, please feel free to contact us directly. For all projects, you'll find a wide array of additional resources at the Net Zero Energy Hub at denvergov.org/energycode. This new resource hub pulls together information from Denver and pairs it with resources from across the country to help building owners, professionals, and residents. This includes specific provisions, compliance options, and additional trainings. You'll find all kinds of information about Denver codes, electrification, and examples of successful projects. More resources are being added all the time, so be sure to check back often. When you navigate to the website, you'll find that it immediately differentiates into commercial and multifamily or residential, which includes single-family duplexes and townhomes. Then once you enter either the commercial or residential resources section, you will be able to navigate to the resources you need by building phase, whether you're looking for a general overview or if you have a project in design, construction, or already in operation. There are additional specific resources for alterations and additions, as well as a section devoted to rebate opportunities. There's a lot of information here, so the goal is to make it easier to find what you're looking for by organizing resources by the type of project and phase that it is in. For example, if you have a commercial project in the design phase, you could click on this icon and find resources relevant to design phase questions, such as resources for the Denver Energy Code, Building Code, Green Buildings Ordinance, Zoning Code, and even funding, financing, and incentives. Dig further, and you can find embedded on-demand training videos and slide decks, fact sheets, links to additional resources, and where to go if you have additional questions. Again, that resources is located under denvergov.org/energy code, and you'll find even more resources under denvergov.org/building code. And of course, if you have additional questions, you can contact us at the email addresses here. Until then, we thank you for viewing this presentation and for helping Denver succeed in meeting its goals in impacting climate change.